Welcome to today's episode of the David Spisak Show. I'm your host, David Spisak, and today we're going to do something different. I'm going to be diving into what I feel is one of the most important business books of the last 20 years. The title is called Jim Collins' Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0. Now, I'm a huge Jim Collins fan. His book, Good to Great, I think may be my favorite business book of all time. And you may have gathered by the 2.0 at the end of this particular book tells you that it is a follow-up to the original version of Beyond Entrepreneurship. Why did he follow up? Well, because things change. The landscape of business is constantly changing and evolving. And you always can tell the best of the best of the best in terms of leaders, managers, and yes, businesses. They are defined by their ability to reinvent. They're defined by their ability to be able to figure out that it's time to do something different. Here's something different. This isn't your typical leadership book. There's no fluff here. It's not Jim Collins' way of writing. And he doesn't just tell us how to be inspiring. He literally gives us a blueprint for building companies that last. His entire career as an author can be defined by that. He's constantly learning for what is it that those companies and the leaders of those companies do differently that allow them to build companies that last. And honestly, some of his ideas are probably going to rub you and maybe some people the wrong way. And that's okay. Frankly, when people rub me the wrong way, I'm more likely to sit up and listen because chances are they're telling something to me through a different lens, through a different perspective, something I haven't thought of before. And I will tell you from my personal experience sitting here after being on this earth for nearly 66 years, that's not a bad way to roll. So let's talk about what really makes companies great and why most leaders today might be getting it completely wrong. Be right back after this short segment, and this episode is brought to you by Interactive EQ. So let's start with leadership. Most people think that the best leaders are charismatic, larger than life, motivational rock stars. Collins, interestingly, says the opposite. He says the greatest leaders, the ones he studied, were never typically the loudest in the room. Instead, they were disciplined, they were humble, and relentless in execution. He calls them level 5 leaders. Now, here's the controversial part. Charisma might actually be dangerous. So think about this. Not only is it not a rock star characteristic, not only is it something that may have a positive impact on them or their organization, their associates, and their managers, but it may actually be dangerous. Why is that? Well, because in his opinion, it can cover up a lack of discipline or hide organizational weaknesses. And I'm telling you, when I contemplated that, I have to draw the conclusion that he's right. I've worked with many, many leaders over the course of my 50-plus year career. And I have to tell you, I've worked with some stone-cold, charismatic, big personality people. Now, let me put this on the table. Don't get me wrong. Some of them were actually quite extraordinary in terms of their results, in terms of their leadership and their ability to get things done. Frankly, some of their companies were. But I have to tell you, there were many, many times when it was quite the opposite. Big personality, they could talk the talk, but they couldn't deliver. They could never walk the walk. So I want you just to ask yourself, are you leading through personality or through principle? Now, let's talk about hiring. And this one hits hard. So Collins' rule is first who, then what. What does that mean? It means that oftentimes, in fact, most of the time, managers, when they're considering hiring somebody, when they're interviewing somebody, the first thing they look for is experience and skill set. And the last thing they look for is their emotional quotient of the person in front of them. In other words, they're looking for whether you know how to do the job and not spending enough time focusing on how well you could do the job, if you can really get it done and meet their expectations. So basically what Collins is saying is before strategy and before vision and before goals, you've got to get the right people on the bus. And he coined that expression in the book, Good to Great. You got to have the right people on the bus. And frankly, you got to get them in the right seat on the bus. You may have the right person for your organization. They may not necessarily currently be in the right position. Now, this means that we should really be hiring based on character before talent. Think about that. So how many times have you seen, and the easiest connection to make is sports, but how many times do you see somebody come out of high school, highly touted, number one in the country, right? Or top 5, top 25, top 100, or they're number one coming out of college. I've known even some Heisman Trophy winners that never even made it to the NFL. How many people were touted as being the greatest there ever were in terms of their abilities, their skill set, right? But they couldn't make it happen. They just did not have the mental fortitude. They didn't have the work ethic. They didn't have the ability to go through the grind every day. They didn't have the focus, the energy, the intensity, or the grit to make results happen. So this means you can train somebody. You could train somebody on anything. You could train somebody on whatever systems or processes you use, but you cannot train them to have that grit, that honesty, or that humility that you really need and want from every associate in your organization. Think about that. That's where your culture comes from. It's the collective of all of your associates' grit and humility, their honesty, the way they do business, how they interact with clients, how they start every day, their level of discipline and execution. Now, the flip side, if you realize somebody's the wrong fit, Collins argues it's better to act quickly than to let the wrong person linger. So here's the debate. Here's what I want you to think about. Do we hire too much based on resumes and not enough based on values? In my personal experience, the answer is a resounding and lopsided yes. Consider this. I want you to consider the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 resumes you've seen. How many of the last 100 you've seen did not represent themselves as being a rock star? Every single one of them was Superwoman or Superman. But yet, how many times have you hired a Superwoman or Superman and they couldn't even rise to the level of average? So this is why I believe what Collins is sharing with us in this book is so critically important. I'm just going to pause there, Austin. So let's talk about innovation and discipline. Everybody wants to talk about innovation, especially these days, right? We are still in the early stages of AI for most people and many companies. And so innovation always tends to be top of mind. And just as an aside, I want to put this on the table. To me, innovation also too often gets associated only with technological innovation. I believe what Jim Collins is sharing with us is innovation in and of itself. I believe when you actually implement a new type of leadership, that is innovation. I believe that when you make wholesale changes, disrupt yourself, and allow yourself to go from having an average of 30, 40, 50% employee turnover, like many businesses have, whether it's fast food, whether it's restaurants, and in the retail automotive industry, I believe somewhere around 40 to 45% or higher is the rule of the day. So while we may want to talk about innovation without having discipline in his mind is chaos. It leads to shiny objects, wasted money, and teams that feel whiplash from constant change. So, I learned this early on in my retail auto career. I'd have my dealer would go away to what's called a 20 group meeting. And this is where you had 20 retail automotive dealers get together about every 4 months. They would pour over hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of metrics. And it was a peer performance group. So it was a really cool way of being around your peers who would then challenge you to be better at certain aspects of your business. You could also take the time to learn from these people. One of the things that was always a fear, kind of a joke, if you will, is you knew that when your dealer came back from that 20 group meeting, man, they were going to be packing at least 1 or 2 or 3 new ideas that they'd want to implement. We wouldn't always take the time to vet them out or to set them up for success, and so oftentimes they failed. And it wasn't that bringing ideas was a problem. That was actually remarkably important. The problem is when you constantly bring those without that execution that Jim is talking about, that's when you get that chaos. And what happens as a result of chaos? It creates this feeling within your team of uneasiness. It creates this unproductive anxiety. It creates this feeling that they're just always waiting for the next thing rather than focusing on getting great at one thing, which, by the way, Jim talks about. He expressed it as the hedgehog principle in his book, Good to Great. So I want you to also think about that when it comes to this incredible proliferation of technology we're seeing today. Whether you're in retail automotive or any other industry, you're going to be seeing an acceleration in technology. You're going to see iteration that you've never seen before. None of us has. And yes, there's going to be an inclination to jump on the next best thing and the next best thing, the next shiny object. If you're in retail auto, you're going to go to the National Auto Dealer Association meeting or some other industry event, and you're going to see many, many people that are promoting products. And frankly, many of those are spectacular, right? Some of them are truly special. But if you bring them back without the right people in place, they just simply don't work. So here's what I want you to think about. Do you actually need more innovation, or do you actually need more discipline? Ask yourself that question right now. Now, this one may sting. Collins also says that the real enemy of growth isn't failure, it's success. We've all heard the term self-sabotage, right? Fear of success is well known. Fear of failure is well known. You don't oftentimes hear fear of success, but it's a very real thing. So why does he say the real enemy of growth is not failure, but actually success? He says it because in his mind, success oftentimes brings comfort. Leaders start celebrating instead of staying a little bit paranoid, a little bit uncomfortable, uneasy. They start to loosen their standards when they get comfortable, and they stop asking hard questions. Collins calls this the Stockdale Paradox, and he interviewed Admiral Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for over 7 years. I'm going to leave that story for you to look up yourself online, but I will tell you, it is absolutely worth looking up the story of Admiral Stockdale and the Stockdale Paradox. If I bring it down, make it really concise, what Jim is saying is this: we must face the brutal facts of today while maintaining complete faith in the future, maintaining faith that we are ultimately going to prevail. We're going to win. So in other words, he's saying you can't sugarcoat your problems. Brutal honesty, even when it hurts, is what drives long-term greatness. Finally, let's end with the big one: clock building versus time telling. Most leaders, according to Jim Collins, want to be the visionary who tells the time. These are the geniuses with the answers. They always have all the answers. But it turns out that great leaders build organizations that can tell time without them ever even being there. Think about that. That's the real test of leadership. Can your business thrive when you're not in the room? When you leave to go on vacation or to go to a factory meeting, if you're in retail automotive, or to go to any industry event, whether you're in retail automotive or not, is there a decline in performance? Does the culture take a hit? Does the execution and discipline leave the room? So you got to ask yourself, have I set my business up in a way through my leadership, the way I'm currently deploying it, to be able to do extremely well when I'm not there? Or are you building a monument to yourself? Now, I got to tell you, when I read that one, that is a tough one to hear sometimes because there's no way around it. When you hear somebody saying, are you building a monument to yourself? It just certainly sounds like they're calling us out if sometimes we care more about the Lucite trophies or the acknowledgments than we do about the actual results and creating a company that is built to last year after year. We're not talking about a team that can rise up and deliver a great season once in a while or win a Super Bowl every 10 years. We're talking about creating an organization that can win their respective Super Bowl time after time after time. You know, I've said this for years. In fact, for decades, it's easier to climb Mount Everest than it is to live up there. I can tell you this, nobody who's ever created a monument, built a monument to themselves, has ever been able to establish a life on the top of the mountain. So here's the takeaways from my perspective. Number one, charisma is seriously overrated. Number two, hire for character first and fire fast when you get it wrong. I will tell you this too. When somebody leaves the building, one thing I also learned from Jim Collins in Good to Great, when somebody walks up to you and says, hey, this is my last day, just wanted to give you a heads up. Number one, he said, ask yourself, well, first of all, he said, ask yourself two questions. Number one, are you disappointed with this news? And two, would you hire them back? And if the answer, he said, was no to both of those questions, you must ask yourself, what in God's earth were they doing there to begin with? Fire fast when you get it wrong. One other big leadership principle, when somebody is delivering suboptimal performance or poor performance time after time, month after month, you have two choices, develop or replace. Most leaders will opt for development, many times because they have a loyalty to this person. Sometimes it's because, hey, we hired the person. We don't want to say we were wrong. And a lot of the times, it's built on hope that somehow something's going to click and they're finally going to figure it out. They're going to get it different. They're going to get it right. And they're going to finally prove that we were right in hiring them. But here's the thing. You know, we're hoping that's going to happen, and we're really hoping that we're not wrong. Chances are we were wrong when it happens time after time after time. The first time we have somebody deliver bad performance and we let that slide, first thing, we're potentially perpetuating the very thing we don't want. But in the long term, we're really culpable potentially in the decline of our business rather than building something great that is built to last. The third thing he brings up is that discipline beats innovation every single time. Discipline, consistency, and execution are going to trump innovation every single time. Fourth thing, be careful in what you celebrate and how you celebrate. You know, as a parent of 4 kids, you know, I've learned sometimes the hard way, you know, as a parent, as we all have, We're so prone to say, oh my God, you're amazing. Oh my God, you're incredible. Oh my God. And instead of just throwing accolades out there, we should be celebrating their effort. We should be celebrating their execution. We should be celebrating their discipline and their consistency, and not lauding them simply for doing something that oftentimes, frankly, they should be doing. We do this in our work environment too. Hey, great job selling that car. Wasn't that what you hired them to do? Hey, great job taking care of that customer. Isn't that what you hired them to do? So be careful. It's important to celebrate as a team when the team wins, when the company wins. But be very careful to celebrate too long, because the result of that, in Jim's estimation, based on his experience, is that you're going to end up landing in a comfort zone. You're going to stop asking the hard questions, and ultimately leading to the decline in performance. And last but not least, the ultimate mark of leadership is building something that endures with or without you. The greatest compliment, the greatest high I'm ever going to have is if I could be gone from the business for a week or a month and you come back, and frankly, not only are they doing great, maybe they're even doing better, because they took the discipline, they took the foundation, they took those things that you put in place, and maybe, just maybe, they layered it with some innovation on top of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which of these do you agree with? And which do you think potentially that Colin perhaps got wrong? Mostly, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the David Spisak Show. Don't forget to subscribe. Please leave a review. It could be good, bad, or ugly. I love them and appreciate them all. And please share this with someone who is, to be obsessed with leadership and growth. Until next time, I want you to make a choice whether you're going to be a clock builder or a time tiller. And most of all, keep pursuing what most consider the unimaginable. Thanks for listening. See you next time.